So, hello, welcome to this service where we are lifting up the many LGBTQ positive stories and poems in the Bible. Welcome everybody who has come to drink from these deep wells of love and acceptance because here there is water for you. Our chalice lighting today comes from the Hebrew scriptures. This is the beautiful passage from the book of Ruth that is often read at weddings. Entreat me not to leave thee or to return from following after thee, for whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God, my God. These words, so traditional, so often read at weddings, such a beautiful declaration of love. What we so often forget is that these are the words of Ruth, not to her husband, but to her mother-in-law, Naomi. Ruth, who loved this woman, Naomi, so much, she wanted nothing more than to be with her forever. Was this not a holy love? So in this spirit, may our chalice flame burn bright. I'm going to light my own chalice here in Zoom land. So, hey, congregation. Today, I am really excited to talk with you about what the Bible says about LGBTQ folks. And spoiler alert, it may not be what you think, because the Bible has gotten an incredibly bad rap in our own cultural debates around gender and sexuality. So, today, I want to walk us through the key passages in the Bible that some people claim have some negative things to say about LGBTQ people, because I believe those texts have been misread, misinterpreted, and misused. And we know that when that happens, the stakes are very, very high for real people's lives. So, my hope today is to liberate those texts from false and bigoted readings, to liberate our country from the weight of oppressive theologies, to liberate you to have these conversations with your family, your neighbors, and to liberate a possibility that the Bible might nourish you more in your spiritual and ethical life. Because after all, this is the sacred text by which our religious ancestors oriented their entire lives. Our faith has come out of religious traditions that loved the Bible and loved to wrestle with what it meant. You don't have to do that, but I want you to know that that tradition belongs to you and it is a possibility for you. So let's dig in. There actually are not that many texts that come up in these debates, and I think we can cover just about all of them in pretty short order. So the first one I want to look at is the story, the infamous story of Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm guessing that many of us grew up having been taught that the story of Sodom and Gomorrah was a story about homosexuality. Well, actually, the scholarly consensus these days is that this story of Sodom and Gomorrah is not about homosexuality at all. It is about hospitality and it is about how outsiders are treated. So, the text, what does it say? The story in this text begins with two angels descending to earth, disguising themselves as human men and visiting the town of Sodom. They're doing sort of a like a secret shopper walk around type of thing. So they go to Sodom And when they arrive at the town gate, they meet a man named Lot, who is himself a fairly newcomer to this town. Now, Lot has no idea that these two guys are angels in disguise, but he offers them a meal and a place to sleep in accordance with the traditions of his society. So the story continues, and I just want to do a trigger warning. This is very disturbing what happens next. What happens is, so the two men are at Lot's house, and all the men of the town surround Lot's house and yell to him that he needs to send out these new guys so that the men of the town can have sex with them. Basically, the men are demanding to be able to have forced sex with these newcomers who, remember, are angels in disguise. The men of the town are actually starting to threaten to break down the door when the angels intervene and say, enough of this nonsense. They save Lot's family and they destroy the city. That is the story. That is the story that too many people today have somehow gotten the idea is an anti-gay story. But I want you to notice that there is nothing whatsoever here about consensual sex between partners of any gender. This story has nothing at all to do with the kind of loving relationships that we affirm today. It is a story about men ganging up to violently assault strangers. So there's that. And as a PS, I want you to be aware that there's a lot of discussion in the other books of the Bible about this story, the story of Sodom, and nowhere is it claimed in these little sort of intra-Bible conversations, nowhere is it claimed that homosexuality was the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. The town's sin, according to biblical commentators, was that the town refused to help strangers and refused to help poor people. So that feels kind of relevant to our situation today, to me. So that's Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, gonna take a breath because we're going kind of fast here. Thank you for following with me. Let's go on to another couple of tricky texts. In the book of Leviticus, that's one of the books that tells about Moses and the Israelites. And so in this book, God is giving Moses a whole lot of very detailed instructions about the rules that the Israelite people are supposed to follow, including, for example, rules about food. What do you eat? Farming. How do you farm your land? There's rules about crop rotation. It's this is the kind of book this is. And there are also some rules in there about sexuality. So here are a couple of the texts that often get cited as supposedly anti-gay. Leviticus 18:22. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. Hold on to that word abomination because it doesn't mean what you think it means. And I'm going to share one more text, Leviticus 20:13. If a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. So at first, this sounds kind of straightforward, right? So we're used to hearing these texts used as like the Bible condemns gay sex, but we need to stop and analyze about what's going on in these texts. So 2 points to remember. I know this is a lot of information, so thank you for bearing with me. First point has to do with that word abomination. What does that word mean? In English, I know we're used to thinking about an abomination as something that is like really horrible, something that any person in their right mind would judge as wrong, bad, you name it. But in fact, that is not necessarily what that word means in the Hebrew Bible. In lots of places in the Bible, the word abomination is a translation for a word that means contrary to proper religious practice, contrary to proper religious practice. Very different idea. For example, Leviticus also says that eating the meat of so-called unclean animals, what today we would call non-kosher, is an abomination. Same word. And what that means is it is against the ritual practices of the Israelite people, not that it is evil, not that it is even inherently wrong. It's just something that if you're Israelite, you're not supposed to do that. So, abomination does not necessarily mean morally wrong, does not necessarily mean evil. So hold that in mind because the next point, which is even more important, is that today most liberal biblical scholars believe that the sexual practices the book of Leviticus is talking about when it says like men should not lie with men and all that kind of stuff. Biblical scholars today are believe that those practices are very specific kinds of behavior that again have almost nothing to do with same gender sexual relationships today. So the book of Leviticus, the whole big point of that is all about keeping the Israelite people from acting like their old neighbors in Egypt and their new neighbors in the land of Canaan. And what was going on in Egypt and Canaan was they had temples where ritual sex was practiced, temples to other gods. So the deal was that some men, as well as some women, worked in these temples, and their job was to have, like, I'm sorry, it's just is what it is. Their job was to have sex with visitors to the temples in rituals that were supposed to make you like more fertile or maybe even like live forever in theory. Probably didn't work, but people try. And as far as we know, that is the kind of sexual relationship that Leviticus was saying, you Israelite people, don't do that. So I hope you can see that this has nothing at all to do with the kind of sexual relationships that we have today, at least most people. When we look at the cultural context, Leviticus, again, is only saying it's against the Israelite religion for an Israelite man to participate in ritual sex with another man in a pagan temple. So that's really different. And one last quick PS. The only text we can find in the Christian scriptures about same-gender sex, Paul has one letter to the letter to the Romans by Paul does mention same-gender sex in a negative light. But again, we're pretty sure that this also has to do with this practice of temple prostitution rather than generally same-sex relationships. Okay, take a breath because we're about to hit a pause. That is pretty much it for the whole Bible. Aside from the passages we've just talked about, there really is no place else in the Bible that criticizes or judges same-gender sexual relationships, um, and certainly nothing that criticizes or judges trans or non-binary people like at all. So, what does the Bible say about same-sex relationships and gender diverse people? So far, nothing. I'm going to take that as some good news. So, hey, everybody, again, I'm back and I want to take just another few minutes, won't be too long, but I'm really excited to share with you three more stories that come from the Bible that speak to the question of, does the Bible have anything positive to say about LGBTQ plus people? And happily, the answer here is absolutely 100%. So, at the beginning of our service today, we mentioned Ruth and Naomi, uh, two women who loved each other very dearly. So that's one story, and I'm going to share three more very briefly. The first story King David. King David is a famous person in the Bible. We first meet him as the shepherd boy who fights the giant Goliath. And he goes on to become the king of Israel and writes the entire book of Psalms, a very prolific and influential person. So David was deeply in love with a man. Um, when David first defeated Goliath, King Saul, who was king at that time, kind of took him under his wing, and there David met Saul's son Jonathan, and the two of them fell head over heels in love. There was a whole lot of political drama. They ended up getting broken up for political reasons, but they never ever stopped loving each other. And sadly, it would take a very long time for me to tell you all the ins and outs, but eventually Jonathan is killed in a battle, and David weeps and sings a song to him that says, he sings, "Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women." David, the most famous of the kings of Israel, was so in love and so openly in love, openly grieving. It is just right there in the text for us to see. So I want to remind you to honor the story of David and Jonathan. So the second story I want to share, these last two come from the Christian scriptures, and this one is from the Gospel of Matthew. In this story, a Roman centurion, that is to say, a military officer of Rome, comes up to Jesus, basically comes up to him on the street and says, "Lord, my servant is lying at home paralyzed in terrible distress." And so this is a request from this Roman military guy to Jesus, the Jewish guy, to come, please heal his servant. The most important word here is the word servant. The word in the original Greek text is pais, P-A-I-S, in transliterated into the Roman alphabet. So this word pais can mean a few different things. It can mean son or boy, or it could also mean servant. And we can be pretty sure that the centurion in this case is talking about his servant, not his son, because there's another version of the same story in the Gospel of Luke. And Luke's version has the centurion using a Greek phrase that means honored slave. Honored slave. So the person who is sick in the story is the servant or the slave of this military guy, and a very honored servant at that. So here's where we need to know that the word pais also has a third meaning. In those days, in the Greco-Roman world, if you were a man who wanted a love relationship with another man, it was accepted that you could actually buy someone to be your lover. Now, obviously, we don't condone that anymore, but that was the fact of the case, that you could buy someone to be your male lover. And the person, that the word for that person, a servant who is his, like the person who bought it, him, the male lover of that person, that word is pais as well. And so we've got this situation. This is the only story in all of the Gospels of somebody asking for healing for a social inferior, military guy, servant. And it begins to seem extremely likely that the centurion's servant was not just a regular servant, but was in fact his lover, someone he cared deeply enough for to literally run out into the street in front of everyone and beg Jesus, come heal him, please. This military commander, he would have been one of the most powerful people in the town, and he is begging this Jewish guy to heal his lover. And what does Jesus say? He says, I will come and cure him. I will come and cure him. There's no hesitation. There's nothing to think about. He just goes. And in fact, he actually praises the centurion, the military guy, for having so much faith. He says, "Truly, I tell you, in no one in Israel have I found such faith." And Matthew tells us to the centurion, this is the text again, Jesus said, "Go, let it be done for you according to your faith." And the servant was healed in that hour. So, just to recap, Jesus chose to heal a gay man's lover and praised that man as an example of great faith to be remembered forever. There's just one more story I want to share with you now. This is the story of the Ethiopian eunuch. This is such a cool story. It happens after Jesus has died, and the disciples are starting to spread the word about him all over. And so in this story, this is in the book of Acts, one of the disciples, whose name is Philip, Philip gets a visit from an angel. That can happen in the Bible. And the angel says, "Hey, Philip, get up and go down the road in the wilderness. Go down to that road that runs from Jerusalem to Gaza." And so Philip goes. Along comes a chariot on this road to Gaza. And in the chariot is a person identified as an Ethiopian eunuch. And that's, of course, the English translation. So in those days, the word translated as eunuch could mean a whole range of things. It could be a descriptor of a gay man or a non-binary person, definitely a queer person. And this person in the chariot, this eunuch person, this queer person, is an official at the court of the Queen of Ethiopia. So Philip is noticing this person coming up and gets another little nudge from the angel. Go talk to that person there. So lo and behold, Philip goes over and finds out that the Ethiopian eunuch is reading the Jewish book of Isaiah. And the eunuch asks Philip for help understanding what it means because they are not sure they are interpreting it correctly. So Philip gives the eunuch an impromptu scripture class and tells him all about Jesus. And the Ethiopian eunuch is absolutely thrilled to hear about this person, Jesus, who accepted and welcomed everybody. And the eunuch says, "Can I be baptized?" And Philip is like, "Sure, come on, let's do it right now." So they go over to this lake that happens to be conveniently right there, and Philip baptizes the Ethiopian eunuch, and they all rejoice. So, what I want you to notice about this story is that an angel has worked really hard to make this happen so that this Ethiopian eunuch, this queer person of color, is warmly accepted and baptized into the new Jesus movement. Blessed be. So, we here do not need necessarily to know these stories to know that everyone is precious here, that everybody matters no matter what their identity. But I hope that we can live here knowing that the Bible, which is so often portrayed as anti-queer, is in fact a rainbow Bible, affirming that the full spectrum of our gender identities and our sexualities are beautiful and whole. And I hope that you will never let anybody take that away from you. May this be fully, fully so for you and for everyone. Amen, and blessed be.